දැන් වැඩි ග්‍රෑම් ගණනක් වැඩි සේවයක් සන්ලයිට් ග්‍රෑම් 60ක්ම රුපියල් 15ක් පමණයි.
Tonight, reaching out, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa issues an appeal to the international community for assistance.
I appeal to the other friends of Sri Lanka present here today to also explore the possibility of extending support and solidarity to my country at this very difficult time.
Sad situation. IMF Managing Director promises full support for Sri Lanka's debt restructuring process.
We have a technical team in the country. We are ready to support Sri Lanka once we have clarity of what the program may look like and how that can be restructured.
Plans in motion. The World Health Organization assures that Sri Lanka's medicine shortages will ease by August. Cracking down. The police are set to deploy an app to track fuel top-ups and cut down on black market hoarders. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Thursday, the 26th of May, 2022.
Lifebuoy shampoo ලෙති කිරි ප්‍රෝටීන් සහ මල්ටිවිටමින් හිසකෙස් මුල සිට පෝෂණය කර ශක්තිමත් කරයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening. You're watching First at 9 with me, David Ebert. Now, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has warned that Sri Lanka's issues are an early warning to the world that vulnerable nations are at risk from the long-term effects of the pandemic and regional conflicts. The President made these remarks at the 27th Nikkei International Conference on the Future of Asia yesterday, where he also called on the international community to help Sri Lanka in any way they can.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa addressed the 27th Nikkei International Conference on the Future of Asia yesterday. During his remarks, the President called on the international community to support Sri Lanka in its path towards restructuring its debts and also help it get by in the interim until an IMF program can be agreed on.
As we work through such solutions, however, we urgently require the assistance of our friends in the international community to ensure that our immediate needs in terms of the importation of essential medicines, food supply and fuel are met. We are also in urgent need of bridging financing to restore confidence in our external sector and stabilize our economy until the debt restructuring process is completed and an IMF program commences. Japan remains one of Sri Lanka's key development partners, and we hope that the negotiations now underway regarding bridging funds from Japan will conclude soon. I appeal to the other friends of Sri Lanka present here today to also explore the possibility of extending support and solidarity to my country at this very difficult time. The grave difficulties facing Sri Lanka are an early indication of the long-tail effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, made worse by the ongoing conflict in Europe that may affect other vulnerable nations too. Supporting such vulnerable nations through these difficulties is essential for regional as well as global stability. It is therefore earnestly hoped that nations able to do so lend a helping hand to these countries as they seek to overcome the very serious threats they face.
Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe says that taxes will be raised in the upcoming budget and he will focus on major spending cuts that will reroute funds towards healthcare, education and social relief. The Prime Minister is expected to deliver a special statement at the next sitting of Parliament scheduled for the 7th of June, where he will address the House on the current economic situation in the country. Meanwhile, International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says that the fund expects to strongly support Sri Lanka on debt restructuring to navigate an economic crisis that she added was caused by economic mismanagement.
Speaking to Bloomberg yesterday, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe offered an update on the latest round of IMF talks that he participated in the previous day.
The proposals they made were acceptable to me in principle. One issue was that the IMF wanted us to have the primary budget should have a surplus of 2% by 2025. I felt, looking at the present situation, that 2023 will not be a good year for the economic development, that we had only 2024. I suggested that it should be somewhere from break even to about a surplus of 1%. So look in that range. I think that was the main issue that was there to be discussed. Of course, I told them, as far as the economic restructuring is concerned, that I wanted growth enhancing reforms and the transformation of this economy to an export oriented economy, giving a surplus on the balance of payments. One day we have to start repaying all the foreign debt we have, and if we don't start earning, we certainly will be getting into debt further and having another default. So we have to change our ways, we have to change our economic system.
Touching on the question of whether taxes will be raised in a new budget, the Prime Minister stated that this alone was not the sole focus of drafting the budget.
There will be tax hikes, we will bring it back, but the main idea of the budget is to cut expenditure to the bone, except in case of health services and education, and transfer that money to ensure that we can give more welfare assistance to a large number of people who have been affected by this economic crisis. It's difficult for people. I understand, I can feel the anger. Some of them are missing one meal. A lot of people who have come to the middle class feel they have been pulled down. People are without employment. Farmers are without fertilizer for 2 seasons. I can understand that. So we have to somehow get out of this rut quickly.
In the meantime, the Premier also outlined his plan to engage with China on restructuring its debts and also look at securing bridging financing as well.
We thought we'll talk with China once we finish the IMF discussion. We will have to ask them about a debt restructuring, but once we wait for this to come in and then see whether we can get any bridging finance, those are issues to be raised with the Chinese, like we have to raise with the Europeans and others.
When next asked whether Sri Lanka remains stuck in a Chinese debt trap, the Prime Minister had this to say.
We are not in a debt trap. Actually, the percentage of loans by Japan and China are the same, except that the Chinese interest rates are higher.
Meanwhile, speaking to an Indian media outlet yesterday on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum at Davos, International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says that the fund will strongly support Sri Lanka on debt restructuring. Georgieva also offered her take on why Sri Lanka's economy remains the way it is right now.
I feel for the people in Sri Lanka. It is breaking my heart to watch the pictures of what is happening in a country that once was quite prosperous. It is a result of mismanagement, and therefore the most important thing to be done is to put the country back on a sound macroeconomic footing.
Right.
And there has to be debt restructuring for Sri Lanka, which we will strongly support. We have a technical team in the country. We are ready to support Sri Lanka once we have clarity of what the program may look like and how that can be restructured. And I want to express my gratitude to India for being such a good friend of Sri Lanka and for advocating for support for Sri Lanka in this very difficult time.
The World Health Organization has promised to provide its fullest support to help Sri Lanka overcome its issues with regard to shortages of medicines. This assurance was given by WHO representative for Sri Lanka, Dr. Alaka Singh, when she met Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Piris yesterday. Dr. Singh also told the Foreign Minister that Sri Lanka's critical period will be until the end of July 2022, and that from August 2022 to July 2023, there will be sufficient medical supplies in the country.
Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Piris met with the WHO representative Dr. Alaka Singh yesterday to discuss Sri Lanka's current challenges, particularly with regard to pharmaceutical products. At the meeting, Dr. Singh assured the Minister of the WHO's full support for Sri Lanka to overcome the island's current health-related challenges, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said. The Foreign Minister told the WHO representative that efforts are underway to establish a central mechanism that would streamline requests for assistance emanating from different state agencies, allowing for the identification of the country's most urgent requirements. This would assist multilateral donor agencies, development partners, and foreign countries in providing focused and targeted assistance to Sri Lanka. The Foreign Minister also welcomed Dr. Singh's expertise on steps that could be taken to address medical challenges and ensure that the maximum benefit reaches the people. Dr. Singh also told the Foreign Minister that Sri Lanka's critical period is until the end of July 2022 and that from August 2022 to July 2023, there will be sufficient medical supplies in the country. She added that there are several offers of assistance received from many countries, which the WHO is coordinating with the UNDP to set up a platform for donations.
Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara announced today that a new app is being tested at refueling stations, which, once implemented, will share real-time data on the number of times vehicles fill up their tanks in a day. The app, according to the minister, is being developed by the Sri Lanka Police. Meanwhile, Love's Gas PLC stated today that it will be able to supply domestic LP gas cylinders to the market in 6 days, as it managed to successfully open letters of credit.
Over the past months, long queues outside refilling stations have become a common sight. Authorities believe that one of the major reasons as to why the fuel queues continue to persist is due to many people stockpiling fuel to sell them on the black market. Today, the Police Special Task Force cracked down on an individual who had stockpiled 226 litres of petrol for sale on the black market. With this being the case, the government announced measures that have been taken to prevent such activities. Taking to Twitter today, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara announced that an app is being tested and developed to ensure that the people don't fill up multiple times a day. He added that the app, which will now monitor vehicles at fuel stations and share real-time data across the island, will also show the refueling history of vehicles. In the meantime, in updates on the domestic gas front, Love's Gas PLC announced today that they will be able to supply domestic gas cylinders to the market in 6 days. It stated that was possible after the company was able to open letters of credit to purchase stocks. Meanwhile, Litrogas Lanka Limited, which has been the only supplier of domestic gas for over the past few months, has urged people not to stay in queues as they are unable to supply gas to the market for a third consecutive day. However, people continued to stand in queues with hopes that the message might change during the day. According to Litrogas Lanka Limited, a vessel with 3,500 metric tons of gas is due to arrive in the country today.
Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa says that the current economic crisis cannot be solved by printing money and that it can only be solved by thinking out of the box to attract US dollar investors into the country. He explained that the depreciation of the rupee will aid this process, making dollar investments in the island a cheaper and more attractive proposition.
රටේ ප්‍රශ්නවලට විසඳුම සල්ලි අච්චු කැසීම නොවේ. රටේ ප්‍රශ්නවලට විසඳුම අපි රාමුවෙන් පිට පැනලා ලෝකයේ සිටින ආයෝජකයින් අපේ රටට ගෙන්වා ගැනීමේ කටයුතු අපි කරන්නට ඕන. මම විශ්වාස කරනවා මේ අන්ධකාරය තුල පුංචි එළියක් තියෙනවා. ඒ පුංචි එළිය තමයි මන් දන්න ආර්ථික විද්‍යාව තුළ රුපියල අවප්‍රමාණය වීම තුළ ඩොලරය වැඩි වීම තුළ ඩොලර් ඉන්වෙස්ට්මන්ට්ස් අපේ රටට ගෙන්වා ගැනීමේ පහසු තත්ත්වයකුත් තියෙනවා. හැබැයි ඒක ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්නට නම් රටේ ස්ථාවරත්වයේ ශක්තිමත් වෙන්නට ඕනේ. එනර්ජි සප්ලයිස් වල, පවර් ජෙනරේෂන් වල, රාජ්‍ය ප්‍රතිපත්ති වල ස්ථාවරත්වය. මොහොතින් මොහොත දිනෙන් දින වෙනස් වෙන ප්‍රතිපත්ති ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙන්නේ නැතුව අපි ස්ථාවර ශක්තිමත් ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් අපි රටට ඉදිරිපත් කරන්නට ඕන. රට ගොඩනගන්න සල්ලි අච්චු ගහලා මේ මිනිසුන්ට අවිල්ල කියලා හරියන්නේ නැහැ. උද්දමන වේගයේ 140ට යනවා කියලා. ඕවා බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්න මේ රටේ ජනාධිපතිවරු, අගමැතිවරු, ඇමතිවරුපත් වෙන්නේ.
And we'll be back with more stories right after this short break. Do stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. A special committee was appointed today to ascertain whether there were any lapses on the military's part during the violence that took place on the 31st of March in Mirihana and on the 9th of May at Coalface Green and Kolpiti. The committee comprises of Admiral of the Fleet Vasanta Karanagoda, Marshal of the Air Force Roshan Gunatilaka and General Daya Ratnayaka. Meanwhile, a statement has been recorded from former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa by the CID investigating the attacks on peaceful protesters.
The Criminal Investigation Department recorded statements former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa at his residence in Colombo in relation to the violence that took place on the 9th of May at Coalface Green and outside temple trees. According to the police, the CID had submitted the former Prime Minister's statements to the Attorney General's department.
මේ මාසයට අදාළව පාර්ලිමේන්තු මන්ත්‍රීවරුන් 11 දෙනෙකුගේ පමණ ප්‍රකාශ සටහන් කොට තිබෙනවා. එයින් මේ වන විටත් තවත් පාර්ලිමේන්තු මන්ත්‍රීවරුන් දෙදෙනෙක් රක්ෂිත බන්ධනාගාරගතව සිටිනවා. ඒ වගේම විවිධ පළාත් පාලන නියෝජිතයන් රාශියකගේ ප්‍රකාශ මේ වනට සටහන් කොට තිබෙනවා. ඒ වගේම පළාත් පාලන නියෝජිතයන් කිහිප දෙනෙකු තවදුරටත් රක්ෂිත බන්ධනාගාරගතව සිටිනවා.
Meanwhile, the Criminal Investigation Department arrested 2 more suspects today in connection to the murder of MP Amarakirti Athukorala and his personal security officer. The CID stated that the 2 suspects had been identified as drug addicts. After interrogating the duo, the CID had uncovered that the 2 suspects had tied the MP's security officer to a lamppost in Nitambur town and assaulted them mercilessly. At this time, the security officer's spouse had called his phone and then pleaded with the 2 suspects to let him go. Following this, the duo had then released him. After further interrogations, the Criminal Investigation Department said that the suspects had used the security officer's ATM card to buy 1 kilogram of rice, a phone worth 40,000 and withdrawn 200,000 rupees. The police stated that the duo had used that money to buy narcotics.
එක් සැකකරුවෙක් වයස අවුරුදු 28ක නිට්ටඹ මඩුවේ ගෙදර ප්‍රදේශයේ පදිංචිකරුවෙක් ඔහු ගොඩනැගිලි කොන්ත්‍රාත්කරුවෙක් වශයෙන් කටයුතු කරන බවට අනාවරණය වී තිබෙනවා. ඒ වගේම වයස අවුරුදු 27ක සැකකරුවෙකු අත්අඩංගුවට ගත්තා එම පුද්ගලයා වරකපොළ ප්‍රදේශයේ ස්ථිර පදිංචිකරුවෙක් බවට අනාවරණය වුණා. ඒ වගේම නිට්ටඹ ප්‍රදේශයේ පෞද්ගලික ආයතනයක සේවය කරන බවටත් අනාවරණය වී තිබෙනවා.
In the meantime, a committee has been appointed to look into any lapses that might have taken place by the Tri-Forces during a protest at Mirihana on the 31st of March and the island-wide tensions that erupted on the 9th of May. The committee comprises of Admiral of the Fleet Vasantha Karannagoda, Marshal of the Air Force Roshan Gunatilaka and General Dayaratnayaka.
In a statement today, the Sri Lanka Army announced that the incumbent Chief of Staff Major General Vikumliyanage is slated to be appointed as the new commander of the Army. His appointment will be effective from the 1st of June following the relinquishment of his office as the Chief of Staff, the statement read further. General Shavindra Silva is set to assume office on the 1st of June as the new Chief of Defence Staff after relinquishing the office of the Commander of the Army on the 31st of May. General Shavindra Silva had been serving as acting Chief of Defence Staff at the time he was appointed as Army Commander. Now, the Government Medical Officers Association, who decided to strike against cuts to overtime and other allowances today, have announced that it has been suspended for a week. This came about after promises were given by the Minister of Health and the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance that the salary cuts that began this month will be reversed soon.
On the 13th of this month, the Chief Financial Officer of the Ministry of Health had written to the Chief Accountant at the Ministry with instructions to calculate overtime allowances of medical officers so that they do not exceed the amount payable as salaries, and for him to forward this list before the 18th of this month. Accordingly, the health staff, including the doctors of the Anuradhapura Teaching Hospital, surrounded the office of the director of the Anuradhapura Hospital yesterday to inquire about the cuts to their overtime and other allowances.
පෙට්‍රල් ගණන් ගිහින් තියෙනවා ජීවන වියදම ඉහළ ගිහින් තියෙනවා ඒ අතර වැඩිප කපලා තියෙනවා. හෙට ඉඳන් අනිත් එක වෘත්තීය සමිතියක මුතු විදිහට වෘත්තීය ක්‍රියාමාර්ග වලට එළවෙනවා.
However, the strike at the Anuradhapura Teaching Hospital did not go ahead as was expected, following assurances given at a meeting between the GMOA and the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance yesterday.
මුදල් අමාත්‍යාංශ ලේකම්තුමා පොරොන්දු වෙලා තියෙනවා නැවත වැටුප් කප්පාදුව සිදු නොකරන බවටත් මේ මාස සිදු කරන ලද වැටුප් කප්පාදුව ඉතා ඉක්මනින් නැවත ලබා දීමට පොරොන්දු වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒ අනුව අපි අද දිනේදී සිදු කිරීමට නියමිතව තිබුණු වෘත්තීය සමිති ක්‍රියාමාර්ගය සෞඛ්‍ය සේවා වෘත්තීය සමිති එකමුතුව විදිහට නතර කරා.
Meanwhile, doctors at the Badulla General Hospital also surrounded the hospital director's office to protest cuts to their overtime and other allowances.
ආණ්ඩුවක් හිතනවා නම් මේ කප්පාදුවෙන් එන බිලියන 8න් රටවල දාන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. ඒක එහෙම නම් ඉතින් අපිට යම් මට්ටමක කැප්මක් කරගන්න නමුත් බිලියන 8න් රටවල ගන්න බෑ කියන එක හොඳට පැහැදිලි. මේ ආගේ වැටුප 150කින් කපා ගැනීම හරහා මේ අදාළ මුද්ද නිලධාරීන් බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ මොකවත් නෙමෙයි. මේ රටේ අහිංසක මිනිස්සුන්ගේ මලගේ. කොමිස්තු අධ්‍යක්ෂකතුමනි අපි කියන්නේ
අපේ රටේ සෞඛ්‍ය සේවය ගත්තාම අපිට වෛද්‍යවරු 80000ක් විතර ඕනේ මේ මිලියන 22ක ජනගහනයට සාපේක්ෂව. නමුත් අපිට ඉන්නේ වෛද්‍යවරු 25000ක විතර ප්‍රමාණයක්. වෛද්‍යවරුන්ට සහ අනෙකුත් කාර්ය මණ්ඩල වලට මේ සේවක හිගය නිසා තමයි මේ අතිකාල සේවවල වැඩ කරන්න වෙන්නේ. එතකොට නිවාඩු දිනවල වැඩ කරන්න වෙන්නේ.
However, in today's discussions with the Government Medical Officers Association, the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance and the Minister of Health have been informed that the salary cuts will be rectified within the next week.
ඊයේ දිනේදී අපිට අනාවරණය වෙච්ච කාරණේ තමයි මුදල් අමාත්‍යාංශයේ ලේකම්වරයා ඇතුළු ඒ නිලධාරීන් සමග කරපු සාකච්ඡාවේදී සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශය සඳහා ලබා දෙන ප්‍රතිපාදන වල කිසිම අඩුවක් කළා නැහැ. අද දිනේදී සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යවරයා සමග තිබුණු මේ සාකච්ඡාවලට අනතුරුව රජයේ වෛද්‍ය නිලධාරීන්ගේ සංගමයේ ඉල්ලීම් වලට ලැබුණු පිළිතුර තමයි මේ රටේ සෞඛ්‍ය සේවකයන්ට ඊයේ දිනේදී සිදු කරන වැටුප් කප්පාදුව එළඹෙන සතිය තුලදී නිවැරදි කරනවා කියන කාරණේ. ඒ ලිඛිත පොරොන්දුව මත මේ වෘත්තීය ක්‍රියාමාර්ග අපි සතිය කාලයක් සඳහා අත්හිටවනවා.
In the meantime, local businessman Nimal Pereira, who was named in an expose by an Australian Broadcasting Corporation investigative piece on a company named Aspen Medical, has threatened the broadcaster with legal action at the District Court of Colombo. In his notice of legal action, Pereira has demanded 10 billion rupees in damages if ABC doesn't remove the impugned publications completely.
Following the broadcast of an Australian Broadcasting Corporation investigative piece titled Profiting from the Pandemic, How Aspen Medical Cashed In on COVID, the naming of Sri Lankan businessman Nimal Pereira has been stirred up in a hornet's nest. The airing of the piece has led to legal action being threatened against the Australian broadcaster and its editorial staff by Pereira. Accordingly, Australian Broadcasting Corporation Four Corners, Linton Besser, Ali Russell, Lucy Carter and Patrick Bagley have been served with legal notice by Pereira's lawyers for allegedly defaming Pereira in a broadcast that allegedly linked him without his permission or input into a story based on unfounded information. It is claimed that the program contains references to Nimal Pereira, which are incorrect and are defamatory. Accordingly, demands have been made to remove the impugned publications completely and forthcoming in order to prevent continuing damage. The letter states that if ABC and its journalists fail to do so, they have been told to consider the notice as a demand to pay 10 billion rupees as damages within 14 days of notice. In the event of non-compliance, Pereira's lawyers state that he will be compelled to institute legal action against ABC and journalists in the District Court of Colombo, Sri Lanka.
Meanwhile, the protesters at the no-deal Gama set up in front of temple trees clashed with the police today as they tried to protest in front of the Premier's office located down Flower Terrace. However, the tensions were controlled after the police managed to get a court order preventing the protesters from causing any form of disturbance that would affect students sitting for the GCE ordinary level exams.
Tensions were high today after protesters in front of the no-deal Gama clashed with police on the Flower Terrace Road today. The protesters had carried out a protest march from the agitation site set up outside temple trees and proceeded to make their way to the Prime Minister's office located down Flower Terrace. As such, the police gathered along the road and set up barricades to prevent the protesters from proceeding down the road. However, the protesters had taken down the barricades that had been set up by the police. Had obtained a court order preventing the people from protesting and disrupting traffic flow on the 5th Avenue, Cambridge Place and other roads in the vicinity. In the meantime, the protesters at the golf face green continued to provide food for those who had arrived at the site last night. The protest site marked its 48th consecutive day since commencement today. Meanwhile, a group of protesters staged a protest in Tangol, calling for justice to be delivered to the peaceful protesters who attacked on the 9th of May at Golfis and Temple Trees. The police, however, prevented the protesters from making their way to the Carlton House in Tangol today.
Welcome back. Now, for a third consecutive day, the all share price index ended in negative territory today as it closed 50.58 points lower to end at 8,319.58 points. The S&P SL20 index of more liquid stocks, meanwhile, also closed lower today at 2,744.54 points.
Sri Lankan shares closed lower for a third straight session today, dragged down by losses in industrial stocks as the country battles a debilitating economic crisis. The CSE all-share index closed 0.6% lower at 8,319.58. Overall market turnover today was recorded at 1.6 billion rupees. Early on Wednesday, crisis hit Sri Lanka announced that Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe will hold dual charge as finance minister and will lead talks with the International Monetary Fund for a bailout. Sri Lanka is currently reeling under its worst economic crisis since independence in 1948, with a severe shortage of foreign exchange, curtailing imports, including essentials such as fuel and medicines.
And that's all the news we have for you tonight. We hope you join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.